I'm Scott Allen Miller, and this is my life living in Latin America, but I'm here in very, very cold New York doing our episode today. I'm up here for about a week. We got in yesterday. I'm going to regale you with some quick stories of our travel, nothing too exciting. We had a rather unadventurous trip, but it did take us a while to get up from Texas, and today we're going to be talking about why both the U.S. and Nicaragua seem to know so incredibly little about each other. It seems that both are complete black holes to the other, and that's actually really important about understanding the relationship and the perceptions that happen between the two countries. And we're going to keep it short today because I'm freezing. So we're going to talk about that right after the bump. But first, this is Geneseo, New York. Completely lost the ability to show you what. There we go. There we go. Skip to that bump. Regular viewers may notice that I am in New York. This is where I've filmed many an episode over the last several years, but it has been a while since I was able to show it here. We were actually here earlier in 2024, about 9 months ago, but we were here for a very short time. My kids were here quite a bit longer, but we're up here for about a week, and of course we picked a time during the polar vortex, so it's already pretty cold and it hasn't even hit yet. This is like the warm-up to the cool down. It's not good. So we started yesterday. I'm recording this on the 3rd. I believe I have that right. We left Texas on the 2nd. We actually went to the airport hotel in the evening on the 1st and discovered that the hotel we got only for its shuttle. We thought it'd be convenient to stay by the airport and get a shuttle. And yeah, they have a shuttle, but not during times that airplanes fly, just during the middle of the day. So it was hours after our flight would have been way too late, right? They didn't start running the shuttles until after our flight left, let alone needed to get to the airport. We got to the airport at the earliest that we could get a taxi, and that put us at enough time, but only barely. We were definitely racing to get into the gate, and we did not have as much time as is technically required. So in Houston, such a major U.S. city, and staying at an airport hotel, a big chain airport hotel with all the resources of that, no shuttle available at all, and no taxi at the right time. We were not incredibly impressed by that process. As always, IAH is the worst airport. Even by American standards, IAH is truly a bad airport in every way. But we did manage to make our flight without a problem. We're flying Spirit today. Great experiences on Spirit. We had great experiences on Avianca as well a week ago. And we flew to Orlando, which is a hub for Spirit. There we were stuck for 6.5 hours, which turned into 7. We did have so we just kind of napped in the airport. We didn't really do anything. We grabbed a quick breakfast. We had so much time. The kids wanted breakfast one place. My wife and I wanted it at another. So we went to one for the kids, wait till they ate, and then we went and got breakfast. It was all awful. Actually, where the kids went was okay, just nothing we wanted. The place we went, terrible. The food was really bad, and of course overpriced. And once again, everything in the airport requires you to pay digitally and all this stuff, but they don't offer Wi-Fi in the airport, and there's essentially no cell phone signal. So we only, at least in parts of the airport, parts of it we were fine. So terrible internet. It's like, how are you supposed to do these things when no one has working phones? Like, it's very strange. But so we were stuck there for 6.5 hours. We got to the gate, and right as we were going to board, there was a delay because there was a medical emergency on the flight coming in ahead of us. She seemed fine, but they had to bring her out in a stretcher and had to have emergency services. So we were delayed boarding, but they made up nearly all the time, all but a few minutes heading up to Rochester. So we got into Rochester at like 5:50. I think we were supposed to be there at like 5:40. So it wasn't bad at all. However, it took forever for our luggage to come out. So even though my Uncle Leo was there to pick us up, it took until minutes to 7 before we actually had our luggage and were out of the airport. So while Rochester's easy to deal with, that was some slow luggage handling. I mean, really slow. But we got all of our luggage, no problems, and got driven down to Geneseo, where I am now. Picked up some Burger King on the way home and had a quick bite. Visited with my dad for probably 2 hours and got to bed quite early. Anyway, that was our travel day. So let's talk about today's topic while I can still hold the camera, because it is so cold out here. My gosh, it's actually only like 1 or 2 degrees below freezing, but man, I'm not used to this. This is what I grew up with. I used to run around in t-shirt and shorts like this and be like, haha, look, I can do this. Now I'm like, I don't have enough coats to make this bearable. Every joint hurts. So this is why I moved away. So one of the things that people really don't understand until you start dealing with this. So when you're in the United States, we'll start from that perspective because I grew up in the US, so I'm used to this. The ideas we have about Nicaragua come almost entirely from really bad sources. There's no big outlets in Nicaragua that are filming it. There's no film industry. There's no television industry. I mean, there's local morning shows and sports, those kinds of things, but there aren't like big programs like Nicaraguan sitcoms or dramas or anything like that. There's nothing that like explains and displays Nicaraguan culture anyway, or even the landscape. Just getting an idea of what Nicaragua looks like was pretty hard up until the YouTube era. And even then, when I was working with stuff in Nicaragua maybe 8 to 10 years ago, we were basically, it was a struggle to find anything showing the country. There was one show that was really good and showed a bit, and they got taken down by themselves because it was a gender fluid topical show that happened to be in Nicaragua. And so I think they got harassed and decided to take it down. But they really stood out as one of the few places doing real content about Nicaragua. And so it's been very difficult until very recently. Now there's plenty, but until very recently, getting even YouTube content about Nicaragua was quite difficult. It just wasn't a thing that people were doing. It's such a small country. It's so poor. And until recently, just creating that kind of content wasn't super popular. So Americans who wanted to know about Nicaragua were pretty much left with Wikipedia articles, the CIA fact book, old news articles, and things that were basically being written by foreign governments, normally ones who were adversarial to Nicaragua. So what you get about Nicaragua is limited at best, and accuracy is highly questionable, which is generally the case anywhere in the world, that you don't have enough of a resource to be able to provide a reference point. So the average American has essentially no knowledge about Nicaragua, good or bad. They just have none. And the average American, now I understand, the average American struggles, and the average person anywhere struggles with putting things on a map. We often make fun of Americans for not being able to put places on a map, but we compare it to a few countries like France or Germany where they're exceptionally good at putting things on a map and be like, haha, they don't know anything. But if you go to most places in the world and start being like, show me X country on a map, they don't know either, right? So it's more of a universal thing that people don't know where non-major locations are. Of course, we know where China is, the US and Russia, but beyond that, people start to get a little bit like, well, I'm not really sure what part of the world that Pakistan is actually in, or I couldn't get it down to its borders. Some of us can, but for the most part, the average person cannot. So that the average person doesn't know where Nicaragua is, it's not a stretch. It shouldn't be surprising. Most people actually tend to put it in Africa, which gives the idea that the knowledge people have about it approaches a strong negative, meaning they have a misinformation about Nicaragua stronger than anything that they actually know about it. Very few people know how to spell it, let alone what language they speak, what culture is there, what its history is. And those that do know a history know it from a very skewed perspective, because most of the places making the news about it in the outside were adversarial about it and lost in major international court of justice cases for war crimes. So they have a strong interest in representing things a little bit differently than they really are to protect their own interest. So you have a very heavily invested party providing most of the media about it. So we tend to know very little about Nicaragua, just in general. And it's completely to be expected. Any real, just putting some brain power behind that, you would say, oh yeah, of course, there's no reason that we would have access to good information about Nicaragua, especially because Nicaragua is not a tourist destination, so they're not spending a lot of money trying to put out some, hey, come check out Nicaragua kind of content. It's just not on their radar. They have other things that run their economy. They can't be spending money on trying to convince other people that it's a cool place when they aren't coming there anyway. It wouldn't really affect anything economically, so it doesn't make sense. Now, if we flip the tables and go to Nicaragua, why are Nicaraguans so confused or in the same kind of black hole about the United States? Obviously, the U.S. puts out all kinds of media about itself. Surely people know a lot about the United States, and they do. The difference is Americans hear essentially nothing about Nicaragua. You could go a year or two or a lifetime and never really hear anything about it. You can go through school and never learn about it other than in a list of countries you don't know about, and maybe get pointed to it on a map once, that you're ever going to hear about the U.S.'s involvement in conflicts or colonizing, that's not a word, the country there. Those things are never going to come up. In many states, they're outlawed to teach. You can't teach about things that involve making other people in the class feel bad. And when something is done badly as an entire country, you're not allowed to teach it in a lot of cases. In some, you are, but in some, you're not. So a lot of people will have actually a banned information about the country. It's actually illegal for schools to really tell very much about their recent history. Basically, the last 120 years are all off limits. So that makes it extremely difficult. So we expect Americans to generally, unless they've really gone out of their way to learn about it, simply not think about Nicaragua at all. In Nicaragua, we have a polar opposite experience. Nicaraguans are bombarded with information about the U.S., but it's not information from, say, people like me walking around the U.S. and showing it off. It's mostly in the form of sitcoms and dramas and reality TV shows and news and movies and stuff like that. Things that are, as we know, not very realistic. If you were to think movies were realistic, you would think that life existed on other planets that we visit regularly, that there are major aliens living under the ocean, that people don't know what email is. Like basic computer use is unknown in Hollywood movies. All kinds of crazy things. Physics don't exist, right? When you watch Hollywood, we all know that the movies and TV are fanciful and fictitious, even the news in many cases. We're used to that. Living in America, we look around ourselves every day and say, oh, yeah, this does not look anything like a Hollywood movie. We accept that it's a fiction, just like when you're reading a novel, the world doesn't operate like it does in a novel. It's just part of the suspension of disbelief. But when you live in a place like Nicaragua, and the United States is so wildly different that you're not really sure what reality is or isn't, it's easy to see all those things in TVs and movies and start to think that they are grounded in reality somewhere and have the idea that, if, for example, use Home Alone. People like to make fun of Home Alone because they have all these kids, they're a young couple, and yet they have a many multi-million-dollar house in a really great neighborhood. And people say, what kind of job did this guy have that they're able to go on vacations and do all these things and have big family gatherings and own this multi-million-dollar house at such a young age? Did they inherit? And they portray them as kind of a normal family. They don't actually say that, but that's how it's portrayed. If you're from another country and you're watching that and you see enough shows like that one's a little bit extreme, it's easy to get the idea that Americans can buy multi-million-dollar houses casually in their early 30s when having kids and having a single parent income, and take wildly expensive vacations, paying for their entire extended family to go do crazy things. It gives a really skewed view of reality. As Americans, we all know that, yes, no one's house is actually that big. They have to film in big houses to make it look good on camera. They have to do things to make it interesting. It's fiction. It's supposed to be entertainment. But when you're outside the U.S., those things turn into a very skewed view of reality. And without anything to give you another vision of what the United States is, it's easy to get so caught up in it that when you tell people that the average American has to go to work like nearly every day of the week, not 7 days a week, but you don't get months off. You don't just go take road trips for months at a time. You can't just be 30 and buy a multi-million-dollar house unless you inherited all that money or whatever. They don't believe you. They're like, no, I've seen TV. I know all Americans are rich. And when we all know, right? You watch American news and people are like, yeah, we're giving all the jobs to the immigrants, right? So all the people who might be immigrants are like, wow, they're giving all the jobs to the immigrants. There's so many jobs. We can just go, but there aren't, right? It doesn't work that way. And everyone in America knows that the media is saying something false. They can look around and say, that's not true. Obviously, it's not true. Somebody somewhere, but there's no handouts going to everyone. There's no, big, land of all this opportunity for someone who's here undocumented. Somebody is able to pay the bills and put food on the table. Sure, a lot of people maybe, but it's certainly not making very many people rich, and no one's living, right? Even the Americans who were born here and have their whole lives and have great college degrees and work really hard, we all talk on one side about how you have a college degree, you're in your mid-30s and you can't even put food on the table. You can't even think about putting a down payment on a house, and you're paying your student loans well into your early 40s. And yet people who are watching the Hollywood and the sitcoms and stuff, when they look at America, they're like, what? I'm going to move there at 25. By the time I'm 28, I'm going to own $1 million house with no debt. I'm barely ever going to have to go to work. I'm going to have European-like working conditions. It's going to be like this fancy world of magic, but it isn't. But they think it is. And it's very hard to convince them otherwise, because on one side, it's the only strong, consistent message that they get. And on the other, there's nothing to ground them. There's nothing to prove that that's not the case without doing some research. So the information that's out there on one side for Americans is basically completely missing, and the only thing you're likely to get is government propaganda. And what you get on the other side is an overload of misinformation that is so strong that people have no idea what the U.S. is even like. They even imagine that the weather is perfect all the time and that at Christmas it always snows, which really doesn't. So it's a just combination of two very opposite effects, creating a situation where Americans know nothing about Nicaraguans on average, and Nicaraguans know a ton that's completely incorrect about Americans on the other. And both sides live in a world of total confusion and disbelief, and it makes it difficult to really step back and say, what's reality like? Now, if you visit, and in both cases, right, very few Americans come to Nicaragua. So getting firsthand information about Nicaragua in the US, very difficult. The only people you ever meet, if you ever meet someone who's been to Nicaragua, is almost certainly a Nicaraguan who left Nicaragua for some reason and is very heavily incentivized to not portray it in the best light because they're not in Nicaragua for a reason. Generally because they want a job, and saying negative things about Nicaragua feels like the thing you have to do to keep your job. So even first-hand reports are very suspect. And in the other direction, Nicaraguans almost never can travel to the United States. Getting a visa is all but impossible. Partially because there's this great effect that Hollywood has produced, making America look like this amazing place. And as long as people don't visit, they're heavily incentivized to go hire a coyote, sneak across the border, and be stuck being undocumented so they can work below minimum wage and do all those jobs that Americans don't want to do. So there's a very strong financial disincentive to allow Nicaraguans on any scale to visit the United States and learn the truth by being tourists. They want them to cross the border illegally and feel trapped financially, so they have to work as essentially indentured servants before they find out what it's really like. So there's this really lack of ability to get direct, honest exposure to the United States via a tourist program, which we normally expect in other countries. And Americans don't really think about this. It seems like, well, of course they're going to visit America. Everybody visits America, right? But no, only Europeans do that broadly. Being able to come to the U.S. and actually see what it's like firsthand as a tourist is quite a privilege that not that many people actually enjoy. So Nicaraguans rarely meet people that they trust that are going to give them firsthand reports and say, yeah, I totally visited. I went to New York, went to Los Angeles, went to Chicago, drove across the country. Here's what I discovered, right? Which would be, I had a cool vacation. It was expensive. I learned these neat things. I saw these great sights. It was fun, but I don't know if it's really the land that you think it is. It's not like everyone was rich and stuff. People had normal houses, normal jobs, had to work, all kinds of stuff, right? They don't get that. It's very rare. So that contributes to the same thing that the media does, that there just isn't an interchange going on between the two countries on a population level where normal people are getting exposure either direction. So while the media is one aspect that's very skewed, there's a lack of firsthand reports to counteract that media being so skewed. And so that effect is incredibly strong. And so many things that you see when talking about the two countries, in either place, the way that they perceive the other is so completely out of kilter with reality. But I think that explains so much of it. When I'm living in the United States, it's exactly that. Everyone I talk to is like, I know nothing about Nicaragua, or I heard this thing 40 years ago and it sounded bad, so I've really built this strong 40-year worry about Nicaragua based on questionable information 40 years ago. And in Nicaragua, they're like, every day I see these wonderful things about the U.S. I'm so, and because on the Nicaraguan side, it represents this basically winning the lotto. If I can get into the United States, I'm just going to be rich. That's a hard emotional thing to get over. If you have that fancy belief, it's kind of like believing in Santa Claus, right? Santa Claus is just going to bring you free presents, and it's the most amazing thing. You don't want to give up, no matter how logically you say that can't be the case. Like, how does he do that? No, obviously Santa Claus isn't real. He can't be. But you want it to be real, so you suspend your disbelief because it fulfills an emotional thing. It drops the dopamine. And so Nicaraguans really struggle even when presented with logic or firsthand information. And they're just like, Americans don't know how good they have it. So they're all millionaires and they just don't know it, right? They're convinced of these kinds of things. And it makes sense when you see how much media portrays it that way and how few reference points they get in the other direction. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit about how the U.S. and Nicaragua interact or fail to interact with each other, and why you're going to get some really wild beliefs from both sides. But always dig in. The stronger the belief, chances are the less exposure they actually have to real information, and chances are that they've never actually met someone with firsthand information about either location, let alone done it themselves. So consider that when you're gathering information or wondering why public sentiment is so strong in both countries. This is equal on both sides. This is not one or the other, right? Just two very different sides of the same coin. Why is the public so confused about what the other place is like? Hopefully that helps you understand the context that people are coming from, which will help you interpret the information that you are given. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. You can also join our awesome community here and help support the channel that way. Get down in the comments, ask your questions, leave comments, say hello, all that kind of stuff. We love when people interact. And if you want to send in a video question, we love putting the audience on the show. That's amazing to do. And we actually have a new WhatsApp Nicaragua expats group that is linked in the show description as well. So just scroll down and you can join. That's public. Just join that WhatsApp group and you can talk to other people who are or are interested in becoming expats. And as always, I will see all of you tomorrow.